Emma Clark stared at her reflection in the campus coffee shop's window, watching Jason Wheeler's arm draped possessively around his new girlfriend's shoulders. 3 weeks? It had taken him exactly 3 weeks to replace her with someone younger, prettier, and apparently more willing to laugh at his terrible jokes. The sting of betrayal burned fresh in her chest, even though she'd been the one to call it quits after catching him texting other girls. "Stop torturing yourself," Sophia whispered, sliding into the seat across from her with 2 steaming lattes. "He's not worth the emotional real estate he's taking up in your head." Emma forced herself to look away from the window. "Oh, it's just... ... Look at him. Acting like I never existed, like our 2 years together meant nothing." She wrapped her fingers around the warm cup, seeking comfort in its heat. "I want him to feel even a fraction of what I felt when I saw those messages. Revenge isn't really your style, Em? Not revenge. Justice." Emma's eyes sparkled with sudden determination. "I want him to see what he lost. I want him to realize that I'm not sitting around crying over him." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Emma's gaze wandered across the cafe until it landed on a familiar figure hunched over a worn paperback in the corner booth. Marcus Rivera, the transfer student from her American literature class, always sat in the back row, never spoke unless called upon, and had this way of looking at people like he could see straight through to their souls. His dark hair fell across his forehead as he read, completely absorbed in whatever world existed between those pages. Emma said, nodding toward Marcus. "Marcus. The guy who barely says 2 words in class. Exactly, he's perfect." Emma's mind was already spinning with possibilities. Think about it. He's cute in that quiet, mysterious way, completely different from Jason's whole loud center of attention thing. Plus he seems ... safe, like he wouldn't complicate things. Sophia followed her gaze skeptically. "You want to use some innocent guy to make Jason jealous? And that seems pretty cruel, even for someone seeking justice. It's not using if we both know what it is. A mutually beneficial arrangement." Emma was already standing, smoothing down her sweater. "I help him come out of his shell, maybe make some friends. He helps me show Jason that I've moved on. Win-win." Before Sophia could protest further, Emma was weaving through the scattered tables toward Marcus's corner booth. Against her ribs, but she forced her expression into what she hoped looked like casual confidence. "Hey, Marcus, right? From Professor Williams' lit class." He looked up, startled, his brown eyes wide behind wire-rimmed glasses. For a moment, he just stared at her like she might be a mirage. Yeah, Emma. Right." She gestured to the empty seat across from him. "Mind if I sit?" "Oh. I wanted to ask, you something?" Marcus dog-eared his page and closed the book. "Something by Murakami," she noticed, then nodded toward the seat. "Sure." Up close, she could see the faint scar above his left eyebrow and the way his fingers drummed nervously. Against the table, there was something almost fragile about him, like he was constructed from carefully balanced pieces that might scatter if someone spoke too loudly. "This is going to sound completely crazy," Emma began, then paused. Maybe Sophia was right. Maybe this was a terrible idea. But then she caught sight of Jason's reflection in the window again. Saw him lean down to whisper something in his new girlfriend's ear, and her resolve hardened. "I need a favor. Actually, more like a proposition."
Us.
Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly. "Okay, I need you to pretend to be my boyfriend. It's just for a few weeks. Nothing real, nothing complicated. Just public appearances, day dates, maybe a party or 2. Make it look like we're together." The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Marcus blinked several times, as if processing her words in a foreign language. "Is this about Jason?" he asked quietly. Emma's cheeks flushed. Of course he'd noticed. Everyone had probably noticed her very public, very messy breakup. Maybe, does it matter? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to his book, then back to her face. Something shifted in his expression, not judgment, but understanding, tinged with what might have been sadness. "Okay," he said simply. "Okay." Emma had prepared for questions, arguments, maybe even outright rejection. She hadn't prepared for easy acceptance. You seem like you're hurting, and if this helps, then okay. He shrugged, as if agreeing to fake date someone was as simple as lending out a pencil. What do you need me to do? Asterisk. The first date was supposed to be simple, a study session in the library's main reading room, where Jason and his usual crowd gathered every Tuesday afternoon. Emma had chosen her outfit carefully, a soft blue sweater that brought out her eyes and jeans that struck the perfect balance between casual and flattering. She found Marcus already waiting at a corner table, surrounded by an impressive fortress of books. Wow, she said, sliding into the chair beside him instead of across from him, close enough that anyone watching would assume intimacy. Planning to read the entire collection? Marcus glanced up from his notes, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Just wanted to be prepared. I wasn't sure what we were supposed to be studying. He gestured to the stack. I brought options. American Lit, philosophy, even some biology in case you needed help with science requirements. Something warm flickered in Emma's chest at his thoughtfulness, but she pushed it aside. This was performance, nothing more. I guess American Lit is perfect. We have that essay due on transcendentalism anyway. As they settled into work, Emma found herself genuinely surprised by Marcus's insights. While she'd always noticed his quiet presence in class, she'd never heard him speak at length about literature. His observations about Thoreau's relationship with nature were nuanced and thoughtful, delivered in a soft voice that made her lean closer to hear. You really get this stuff, she said, genuinely impressed as he explained the connection between Walden and modern environmental philosophy. I've always loved how writers can make you see the world differently, Marcus replied, his fingers tracing the margin notes in his well-worn textbook, like they're sharing a secret that was hiding in plain sight. Emma was so absorbed in their conversation that she almost forgot about Jason until she heard his distinctive laugh from across the room. She glanced over to see him watching them, his expression unreadable. Perfect. Without thinking, she placed her hand over Marcus's on the table. His skin was warm, slightly calloused, and he went very still at her touch. Sorry, she whispered, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the gesture. I just wanted to make sure he was looking. Is he? Marcus asked, not pulling his hand away. Emma risked another glance. Jason was definitely staring now, his jaw tight with something that looked suspiciously like jealousy. Oh, he's looking. All right. Marcus nodded and, to her surprise, turned his hand palm up so their fingers could intertwine. Then we should probably sell it. The rest of the week fell into an easy rhythm. Marcus would walk her to class, carrying her books without being asked. They'd sit together at lunch, his quiet presence a comfortable contrast to the usual campus. Chaos. He remembered that she liked her coffee with extra cream, that she had a habit of tucking her hair behind her left ear when she was thinking, that she always chose chocolate over vanilla. You're really good at this, Sophia observed on Thursday as they watched Marcus wave goodbye before heading to his evening shift at the campus bookstore. Almost too good. Are you sure this is still pretend? Emma bristled at the implication. Of course it's pretend. That's the whole point. But even as she said it, she felt a flutter of uncertainty. When Marcus had surprised her with her favorite pastry from the coffee shop that morning, you mentioned you didn't have time for breakfast, he'd said with that shy smile. Her reaction had felt decidedly non-performance related. The real test came. Party. Emma had spent an hour getting ready, choosing a dress that was a catching without being obvious. Marcus picked her up right on time. Looking unexpectedly handsome in dark jeans and a button-down shirt that brought out the gold flecks in his brown eyes. You clean up nice, she said as they climbed the stairs to Tyler's apartment. Thanks. You look ... He paused as if searching for the right word. Beautiful. Really beautiful. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Jason had always been generous with compliments, but they'd felt automatic, rehearsed. Marcus spoke like he was sharing an observation, rather than delivering a line. The party was in full swing when they arrived. Music pulsing from hidden speakers and clusters of people scattered across the rooftop deck. Emma spotted Jason immediately. He was holding court near the makeshift bar, gesturing animatedly as he told some story to a captive audience. Ready? she asked Marcus, slipping her hand into his. He squeezed gently. Lead the way. They made their rounds, Emma introducing Marcus to her friends and classmates. He was quieter than her usual social circle, but there was something magnetic about the way he listened, really listened, when people spoke. He asked thoughtful questions, remembered details from previous conversations, and had a way of making even the most talkative person feel heard. Asterisk. I like him, declared Jessica from her sociology class after Marcus had excused himself to get them drinks. He's got this whole mysterious intellectual thing going on. It's very different from Jason. Different how? Emma found herself asking. Jason always felt like he was performing, It's like he was the star of his own show, and the rest of us were just audience members. Marcus seems more ... real, like he's actually interested in what's happening around him, instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. Before Emma could respond, she felt a familiar presence behind her. Jason appeared at her elbow, beer in hand, and wearing the charming smile that had once made her heart race. Emma, hey, having fun? Jason, her voice came out cooler than she'd intended. Yeah, great party. I've been meaning to talk to you. About us. I think I made a mistake. There's no us anymore, Jason. You made that pretty clear. His eyes narrowed slightly. Right, I heard you're seeing someone new, the bookworm, from your lit class. Emma felt her temper flare at his dismissive tone. His name is Marcus, and yes, we're together. Really? 'Cause he doesn't seem like your type? Kind of quiet, isn't he? Before Emma could respond, Marcus appeared beside her with 2 drinks, his expression carefully neutral despite having clearly overheard Jason's comment. Everything okay here? He asked quietly, offering Emma her drink. Jason straightened to his full height, clearly trying to intimidate, but Marcus didn't flinch. If anything, he seemed to grow calmer, more centered. Just catching up with Emma, Jason said. We have a lot of history. I'm sure you do, Marcus replied evenly. But that's all it is now, isn't it? History. The quiet confidence in his voice surprised Emma. This wasn't the shy, hesitant guy from the coffee shop. This was someone who knew exactly who he was and wasn't afraid to stand his ground. Jason's smile turned predatory. We'll see about that. As he walked away, Emma felt Marcus's hand settle gently on her lower back, protective, reassuring. Thank you, she said. For what? For having my back. Marcus looked down at her, something unreadable flickering across his features. Yes, I did. The rest of the night passed in a blur of conversations and laughter. But Emma found herself increasingly aware of Marcus beside her, the way he listened when she spoke, how he seemed to anticipate what she needed before she asked. The genuine warmth in his smile when she caught him watching her as they walked back to her apartment. The coastal breeze carrying the salt scent of the ocean. Emma realized that somewhere between the library study session and tonight's party, the lines had begun to blur. What had started as performance was beginning to feel dangerously real. Asterisk, the morning sun streamed through Emma's apartment window as she stared at her phone. Marcus's text message glowing on the screen. Can't make lunch today. Family stuff. Rain check. It was the first time in 2 weeks that he'd canceled their plans. And the disappointment that twisted in her stomach felt far too real for what was supposed to be a fake relationship. Sophia emerged from the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee, taking one look at Emma's face. Let me guess, your pretend boyfriend is being a real human being with actual responsibilities? It's not like that, Emma protested, accepting the coffee gratefully. I just... We had plans. Plans you made to keep up appearances. Or plans you were actually looking forward to? Before Emma could answer, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo. Marcus standing in what looked like a grocery store, making an exaggerated, confused face while holding up 2 different boxes of cereal. As the caption read, Grace says Lucky Charms are a vegetable because they have colors. Thoughts? Despite herself, Emma smiled. Over the past 2 weeks, she'd learned that Grace was Marcus's 15-year-old sister, though he rarely talked about his family beyond mentioning her occasionally. Who's Grace? She found herself asking aloud. Sophia raised an eyebrow. You don't know about his family? We haven't really talked about personal stuff, Emma admitted, realizing how strange that sounded. 2 weeks of dating, and she knew Marcus took his coffee black, preferred Murakami to Hemingway, and had a habit of drumming his fingers when he was thinking. But she knew almost nothing about his life outside their carefully orchestrated encounters. An hour later, Emma found herself walking toward the address Marcus had reluctantly given her when she'd insisted on dropping off the notes he'd missed from their canceled study group. The neighborhood was older, with small houses that had seen better decades, and gardens that spoke of careful tending despite limited resources. She was about to knock on the door when she heard voices from the backyard. Following the sound, she discovered Marcus crouched beside an elderly woman who was struggling with a heavy bag of mulch. "Mrs. Patterson, you know you're supposed to call me for things like this," he was saying gently, easily lifting the bag and carrying it toward her flower bed. "You do enough for me already, dear," the woman replied, though her grateful smile suggested she was happy for the help. "How is Grace doing with her college applications?" "Good. Nervous, but good. She got her SAT scores back yesterday, minus 1,480. That's wonderful. She's so bright, just like her brother." Emma watched from the corner of the house as Marcus spread mulch around the woman's roses with practiced efficiency. There was something different about him here, more relaxed, more himself. The careful politeness he wore around campus had melted away, replaced by genuine warmth. "Marcus." A voice called from the house next door. A teenage girl appeared on the back porch, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun and paint streaks on. Her oversized t-shirt, the college counselor called back. "She wants to schedule another meeting about the scholarship applications." "Good news?" Marcus asked, straightening up. "I think so." She seemed excited. Grace grinned, then noticed Emma standing awkwardly by the fence. "Oh, hi." Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. I was just bringing Marcus some notes from class." "Emma." Marcus turned, surprise, and something that might have been embarrassment crossing his features. "What are you doing here? You missed study group, so I thought." She held up the folder, feeling increasingly foolish. Mrs. Patterson looked between them with obvious curiosity. "Is this the girlfriend you've been mentioning, Marcus?" Marcus's cheeks flushed. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Emma." "Emma, this is my neighbor." "Mrs. Patterson, lovely to meet you, dear." "Marcus talks about you all the time." "He does." Emma glanced at Marcus, who was now focused intently on the mulch at his feet. "Oh yes. Just yesterday he was telling me about how you notice things, little details that other people miss. He says you have a way of making even ordinary moments feel special." Emma's heart did something complicated in her chest. That didn't sound like someone describing a fake girlfriend. That sounded like... "Mrs. Patterson," Marcus interrupted gently, "didn't you say you needed help with your kitchen faucet?" As Marcus disappeared into the elderly woman's house, Grace approached the fence. Up close, Emma could see the family resemblance. The same thoughtful brown eyes, the same way of really looking at people. "You're the literature girl," Grace said. It wasn't a question. "I guess so. He likes you, you know." "Actually likes you, not just... ... Grace waved her hand vaguely. "Whatever this started as," Emma's stomach dropped. "What do you mean? Come on. You think I don't know when my brother is pretending? He's been taking care of everyone else since our parents died 3 years ago. He doesn't do anything just for himself." Grace studied Emma with an intensity that reminded her sharply of Marcus. "But the way he talks about you, that's not pretending." "Grace, Emma." Marcus reappeared, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Everything okay?" "Fine," Emma said quickly, though nothing felt fine. "Grace was just telling me about her college applications. She's applying to art schools," Marcus said, pride evident in his voice. "Show her some of your paintings, Grace." "They're nothing special," Grace protested, but she was already leading them toward the house. Emma followed them. Inside, noting the small but immaculately kept space, the living room walls were covered with Grace's artwork, vibrant canvases that showed real talent and a unique perspective. But what caught Emma's attention was the bookshelf in the corner, packed with well-worn volumes and topped with framed photographs. In one photo, a younger Marcus stood with his arm around Grace and 2 adults who were clearly their parents. Everyone was laughing, caught in a moment of pure joy. Another showed Marcus at what looked like a high school graduation, but instead of the typical cap and gown celebration, it was holding Grace, who couldn't have been more than 12. "These are beautiful," Emma said, gesturing to Grace's paintings. But her eyes kept drifting to the photographs, thanks. "Marcus got me into art therapy after." ... double quotes, Grace glanced at her brother. Well, after everything changed. Marcus moved to stand beside Emma, his presence warm and steady. "Grace is incredibly talented. She's been accepted to 3 schools already. With scholarships," Grace added, "thanks to someone who spent every weekend junior year driving me to portfolio reviews and summer art programs." Emma looked at Marcus, seeing him as if for the first time. The quiet guy from her literature class wasn't just shy. He was carrying weight she couldn't have imagined. He was working multiple jobs to support his sister, helping elderly neighbors, and somehow still finding time to maintain perfect grades and participate in her elaborate scheme to make Jason jealous. "I should go," she said suddenly, overwhelmed by the realization of how selfish she'd been. "I just wanted to make sure you got the notes, Emma. Wait." Marcus followed her toward the door, but she was already backing down the front steps, her chest tight with something that felt dangerously close to panic. "I'll see you in class Monday." As she walked quickly toward her car, she heard Grace's voice from the porch. "Nice going, genius. You scared her off?" "I didn't scare her off," Marcus replied quietly. "I think she just figured out that this was never really pretend for me." Emma's steps faltered, but she didn't turn around. Because Grace was right, and Marcus was right, and everything about this situation had spiraled completely out of her control. She'd wanted to make Jason jealous, but somewhere along the way, she'd fallen for the boy she was supposed to be using. And worse, she was beginning to suspect that he'd been falling for her too, not the performance version of herself, but the real her that somehow emerged when she was with him. The question now was what she was going to do about it. Asterisk. Emma looked at Marcus, seeing him as if for the first time. The quiet guy from her literature class wasn't just shy. He was carrying weight she couldn't have imagined. He was working multiple jobs to support his sister, helping elderly neighbors, and somehow still finding time to maintain perfect grades and participate in her elaborate scheme to make Jason jealous. "I should go," she said suddenly, overwhelmed by the realization of how selfish she'd been. "I just wanted to make sure you got the notes." "Emma, wait." Marcus followed her toward the door. "You don't have to leave." But she was already backing down the front steps, her chest tight with something that felt dangerously close to panic. "I'll see you in class Monday." As she walked quickly toward her car, she heard Grace's voice from the porch. "Nice going, genius. You scared her off." "I didn't scare her off," Marcus replied quietly. "I think she just figured out that this was never really pretend for me." Emma's steps faltered, but she didn't turn around. Because Grace was right, and Marcus was right, and everything about this situation had spiraled completely out of her control. She'd wanted to make Jason jealous, but somewhere along the way, she'd fallen for the boy she was supposed to be using. And worse, she was beginning to suspect that he'd been falling for her too, not the performance version of herself, but the real her that somehow emerged when she was with him. The question now was what she was going to do about it. Asterisk. Emma spent the weekend avoiding Marcus's texts and calls, throwing herself into studying and pretending that the hollow feeling in her chest was just stress about midterms. But Monday morning's American literature class made avoidance impossible. Marcus was already in his usual seat when she arrived, and the careful distance she tried to maintain crumbled the moment their eyes met. "Can we talk after class?" he asked quietly as she settled into the seat beside him, the seat that had somehow become hers over the past 3 weeks. "About what?" she whispered back, though they both knew exactly what. Professor Williams entered before Marcus could answer, launching into a discussion about transcendentalist philosophy that Emma found impossible to focus on. She kept stealing glances at Marcus's profile, noticing the tension in his jaw and the way his usually neat handwriting had turned messy and distracted. "Mr. Rivera," Professor Williams called out, making both Emma and Marcus jump. "Since you seem particularly thoughtful today, Perhaps you'd like to share your perspective on Thoreau's concept of deliberate living. Marcus straightened, and Emma watched as he transformed, the uncertainty melting away as he found his footing in familiar intellectual territory. Thoreau believed that most people live lives of quiet desperation because they never stop to examine what they actually want versus what society expects of them, Marcus said, his voice gaining strength. He thought we'd get so caught up in performing the roles we think we should play that we lose sight of who we really are underneath. Emma's breath caught. Was he talking about Thoreau or about them? Interesting interpretation. Professor Williams nodded. And how do you think someone breaks free from that kind of performance? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze flickering briefly to Emma before returning to the professor. I think it starts with honesty. With someone, maybe yourself, maybe someone else, about what's real and what's just ... theater. The rest of class passed in a blur. Emma felt hyper-aware of every movement Marcus made, every breath, every moment his fingers drummed against his notebook in that familiar nervous rhythm. When Professor Williams finally dismissed them, the usual post-class chatter felt muted and distant. Emma, Marcus said as students filed past them. Please, just 5 minutes. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and followed him out of the building toward a quiet spot under the old oak tree where they'd shared lunch just last week. It felt like a lifetime ago. I know you're pulling back, Marcus began, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, and I understand why. It's got complicated. Marcus, let me finish. Please. He took a shaky breath. I need you to know that I didn't plan for this to happen. When you asked me to pretend, I thought I could handle it. I thought it would be simple. Emma's heart was racing. It was supposed to be simple, but it wasn't. Not for me. Marcus looked up at the branches above them, gathering courage. Somewhere between that first study session and watching you laugh at Tyler's party, I forgot we were pretending. I think maybe you did too. Before Emma could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Professor Williams. Ms. Clark, could you stop by my office? I have some information about Mr. Rivera that might interest you regarding your final project on contemporary literature. Emma stared at the message, confused. Professor Williams wants to see me. About you, apparently. Marcus's face went pale. About me. 20 minutes later, Emma sat across from Professor Williams in his cluttered office, trying to process what she'd just learned. I probably shouldn't be sharing this, Professor Williams was saying, but given that you two seem close, and considering your final project proposal on contemporary authors who've influenced young adult literature, he slid a book across his desk. I thought you might find this interesting. Emma picked up the novel, a sleek hardcover with elegant typography. The author's name made her breath catch. Mr. Bennett. Marcus Rivera Bennett, Professor Williams clarified, though he publishes under Mr. Bennett. His father was Michael Bennett. You might know him from his trilogy about coming-of-age in rural
America.
Won the Pulitzer in 2018. Emma's mind reeled. Marcus's father. Michael died in a car accident 3 years ago along with his wife. Tragic story. They were driving back from Marcus's high school graduation when it happened. Professor Williams's expression grew somber. Marcus was set to attend Columbia on a full scholarship. Had his whole future mapped out. But after the accident, he deferred indefinitely to care for his younger sister. But why are you showing me this book? Because Marcus wrote it. Published. It last year under his father's publisher. It's a beautiful piece of work. A novel about a young man navigating grief and responsibility, while trying to find his own identity separate from his father's legacy. Professor Williams paused. The dedication reads for Grace, who teaches me daily what courage looks like. Emma opened the book with trembling hands, flipping to the dedication page. There it was, in elegant print, confirmation of everything Professor Williams had just told her. He's incredibly talented, the professor continued, but he's also incredibly private about it. I only know because his editor contacted the department when he transferred here, wanting to make sure he'd have support to continue his writing while completing his degree. Does he know that you know? I don't think so, and I'd prefer to keep it that way, unless he chooses to share it himself. Professor Williams leaned back in his chair. I'm telling you because you seem to bring out something in him. He's been more engaged in class discussions since you two started spending time together. And because that young man has sacrificed more than most people twice his age." Emma left the professor's office in a daze, the book clutched against her chest. She found herself walking aimlessly across campus, her mind spinning with this new information. Marcus wasn't just the quiet transfer student who'd agreed to help her make Jason jealous. He was a published author who'd given up an Ivy League future to care for his sister. He was someone who wrote novels about grief and identity while working multiple jobs and somehow still finding time to help elderly neighbors and support her. It's a ridiculous scheme. She thought about all the small moments that now made perfect sense. The way he understood literature on such a deep level, how he always seemed to know exactly what to say, the careful way he observed the world around him. She thought about Grace's paintings on the walls and the pride in Marcus's voice when he talked about his sister's college acceptances. Most of all, she thought about what he'd said under the oak tree. "I forgot we were pretending." Emma pulled out her phone and scrolled through their text conversations from the past 3 weeks. Mixed in with the practical messages about their fake relationship were genuine moments. Photos he'd sent her of interesting books, responses to things she'd shared about her classes, little observations about life that revealed the writer hiding beneath the shy exterior. He'd been showing her who he really was all along. She'd just been too focused on her performance to notice her. Phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Jason's name flashed on the screen. "Emma, I've been thinking about us, about what we had. I made a mistake, and I want to make it right." For the first time in weeks, hearing Jason's voice didn't produce any emotional response at all. No anger, no hurt, no satisfaction that her plan had worked. Just ... nothing. "Jason," she said quietly, "there is no us anymore. But I thought. The whole thing with that Marcus guy, that's not serious, right? You're just trying to get back at me." Emma stopped walking, Professor Williams's book still pressed against her chest. "No, Jason. I'm not trying to get back at you. I'm trying to move forward with him." "Come on, Emma, you can do better than some nobody who works at a bookstore." "He's not nobody," Emma said, surprised by the fierce protectiveness in her own voice. "He's someone who knows what real love looks like, someone who puts other people first, someone who ... She paused, the truth crystallizing as she spoke it. "Someone who sees me for who I really am, not just who he wants me to be." After hanging up on Jason's sputtering protests, Emma realized where her wandering had taken her. She was standing outside the campus bookstore where Marcus worked evenings. Through the window, she could see him behind the counter, helping a customer find something in the poetry section. The Marcus she was watching now was the same person who'd agreed to fake date her, who'd defended her at Tyler's party, who'd listened to her talk about her dreams and fears as if they were the most important things in the world. But he was also the person who'd written a novel about grief and courage, who'd sacrificed his own future for his sister's, who'd been showing her authentic love while she'd been focused on revenge. Emma took a deep breath and pushed open the bookstore door. It was time to stop pretending. The bell above the bookstore door chimed softly as Emma stepped inside, the familiar scent of coffee and old books wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. Marcus looked up from the poetry section, his expression shifting from surprise to something more guarded when he saw her clutching Professor Williams's book. "Emma." He excused himself from the customer he'd been helping and walked over, his movements careful, as if she might bolt at any moment. "What are you doing here?" She held up the book, watching his face transform as recognition dawned. Color drained from his cheeks, and for a moment, he looked exactly like the shy transfer student she'd first approached in the coffee shop. "Professor Williams thought I should read it," she said softly, "for my final project on contemporary literature." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. "I asked him not to tell anyone. He didn't break your confidence. He just... gave me a book recommendation." Emma's voice caught. "Marcus, why didn't you tell me?" He glanced around the nearly empty store, then gestured toward the small seating area in the back corner. settled into worn armchairs across from each other, the book resting on the table between them like evidence of all the ways Emma had misjudged him. "What was I supposed to say?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm Marcus. I'm a published author who gave up Columbia to work retail and take care of my teenage sister. That's not exactly normal college student conversation. But I told you things. About my family, my dreams, my fears about life after graduation. You listened to all of that and never what? Never tried to impress you with my tragic backstory? Marcus's tone held a hint of bitterness that Emma had never heard before. That's not who I wanted to be with you. Emma leaned forward. Then who did you want to be? Just me. Not Michael Bennett's son. Not Grace's guardian. Not the guy everyone feels sorry for because his parents died. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, disheveling the careful style. When you asked me to pretend to be your boyfriend, it was the first time in 3 years that someone wanted something from me that wasn't about taking care of someone else. Marcus, I know it sounds pathetic, but for those first few weeks, even though it was fake, I gotta just be a college student with a girlfriend. I gotta walk you to class and buy you coffee, pretend that my biggest worry was whether I'd studied enough for my next exam. Emma's heart ached at the exhaustion in his voice. She thought about all the times he'd seemed tired, all the shifts at the bookstore, and the way he always deflected questions about his own plans and dreams. But it wasn't fake, she said quietly. Not really. Not for me. Marcus looked up, hope and skepticism warring in his expression. Emma, you don't have. 2, I'm not saying this to make you feel better. I'm saying it because it's true. She took a shaky breath. When you walked me home from Tyler's party and we talked about books under the streetlights for 2 hours, that wasn't performance. When you brought me soup when I was sick last week and stayed to watch terrible movies with me, that wasn't about making Jason jealous. And when you looked at me like I was the most interesting person in the world, just for having an opinion about transcendentalism, she smiled through the tears she hadn't realized were falling. That was real. Marcus was very still, as if afraid that moving might break the spell. I read some of your book, Emma continued, opening to a page she'd marked. There's this part where the main character talks about the difference between being needed and being wanted. About how sometimes the people we love most become burdens we carry instead of choices we make. She looked up to find Marcus watching her intently. Is that how you feel about Grace? About your life? Sometimes, he admitted. And then I feel guilty for feeling that way. What if you didn't have to choose? What if you could take care of Grace and still have things for yourself? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. What are you saying? Emma stood up, moving to the chair beside him instead of across from him. I'm saying that I started this whole thing because I wanted to make Jason jealous. I wanted him to see what he'd lost and come crawling back, and did he? He called me this afternoon. Told me he'd made a mistake and wanted to get back together. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. What did you tell him? I told him no. Emma reached for Marcus's hand, threading their fingers together the way they had so many times. Over the past month, told him I wasn't interested in looking backward anymore. Emma, I'm not finished. She turned to face him fully. I told him no, because somewhere between that first study session and right now, I stopped performing and started feeling. Real feelings for a real person who makes me want to be better than I was. Marcus brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. You don't know what you're getting into. My life is complicated. Grace still has 3 years of high school and then college, and I can't just abandon. Who said anything about abandoning anyone? Emma interrupted. Grace likes me. I like Grace. I like the way you are with her, the way you've built a life that makes room for both sacrifice and joy. I like that you help Mrs. Patterson with her garden, and that you know the names of all your regular customers here. She paused, gathering courage for what she needed to say next. I like that you write novels about grief and hope, and that you see beauty in ordinary moments, and that you've somehow managed to keep your heart open despite everything you've been through. She squeezed his hand. I don't want you to be someone different, Marcus. I want you exactly as you are. Marcus was quiet for so long that Emma began to worry she'd misread everything. But then he smiled, not the careful, polite smile he wore in public, but something wide and real and transformative. "I wrote about you," he said suddenly. "What? In my journal?" "After that first week, I started writing about this girl who saw things differently than everyone else, who made even fake moments feel genuine." He laughed, shaking his head. "My editor is going to think I've lost my mind when she reads it." "Why?" "Because for the first time since my parents died, I wrote something hopeful." Emma felt her breath catch. "Marcus. I know this is crazy. I know we started this whole thing for the wrong reasons. But Emma, what I feel for you, that's not pretend. That's not performance. That's just... He searched for the words. "That's just the truest thing I've felt in a long time. This time." When Emma leaned forward and kissed him, there was nothing fake about it. No audience to perform for, no ex-boyfriend to make jealous, no elaborate scheme to maintain. Just two people who had found something real in the midst of all their careful pretending when they broke apart. Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "So what happens now?" he asked. Emma smiled, thinking about the future that stretched ahead. Of them messy and complicated and nothing like the tidy revenge plot she'd originally imagined. "Now we stop pretending," she said, "and see what happens when we choose each other for real." Outside the bookstore windows, the coastal city hummed with its usual evening energy. Students hurried past on their way to late dinners and study sessions. Couples walked hand in hand along the boardwalk, and the ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon. But inside, in the quiet corner between the poetry and philosophy sections, Emma Clark and Marcus Rivera Bennett were writing the beginning of their own love story, one that had nothing to do with making anyone jealous, and everything to do with choosing authenticity over performance, hope over hurt, and real love. Over anything they'd settled for before. 3 months later, when Grace got her acceptance letter to her top choice art school with a full scholarship, the celebration dinner at their small house would include Emma. And when Marcus's second novel was published the following year, a story about finding unexpected love in the midst of grief, the dedication would read, "For Emma, who taught me the difference between being seen and being known." But that night in the bookstore, all they knew was that what had started as an elaborate pretense had become the most honest thing either of them had ever experienced. And sometimes, Emma thought as Marcus walked her home under the streetlights, the best love stories begin with the courage to stop performing and start being real.